Test 1 2 1 2. Well, we'll see. It wasn't working, but cool. Okay. You are live now. We are live now.
Okay.
Awesome.
Hi.
Hi. So this is Tonia Sina. Actually, maybe I'll let you talk about yourself.
Sure. Should I look here or here?
That's a good question. We have two cameras going. Just so you know, maybe we'll switch it up.
One, camera
So,
two.
okay. I'm looking at camera one. You look at camera two.
Okay.
Okay.
So my name is Tonia Sina, and I am a specialist of intimacy for the stage, which is essentially choreographing moments of sex and erotic choreography or just intimacy for stage work and for theater.
And so when you say intimacy, what expand on that? 'Cause you said it's not just the kissing and the sex, but what else can we think about as intimacy?
Well, it's kind of taking the purest form of acting and helping actors find intimacy with their partners using acting techniques so that they don't have to fake intimacy with anyone, that they can find real intimacy with anybody that they're partnered with, and there's no excuses from, like, oh, I don't like this person, I don't know this person, with these techniques you can find intimacy with anybody at any time in any kind of instantly.
So we're kind of talking about like vulnerability and getting there, would you say, like truthfully and efficiently? So even though you don't actually have a personal relationship with this individual, you're still able to access a truth of emotion.
Yeah, it's our job as actors to access emotions easily, and I think that we have backtracked a little bit with finding intimacy with people with electronics and with disconnecting with everybody. We don't really look people in the eyes as much as we used to because we communicate here, and that's really made it harder for actors to be comfortable practicing it as much as they used to. I think that's kind of set us back a bit from when I started even working on this.
So you started when?
I started working on this in 2004 when I was in graduate school at Virginia Commonwealth University.
And you said you've seen quite a change then in the actors that you're working with, and what age range are we talking about? Because I think it's also tempting to think of this as like a college thing that young people only have to deal with. But have you seen a difference in, let's say, actors in their 40s?
Yeah, I initially was working with college students because I was a professor. And college students are interesting because despite the fact that they're young and they don't have a lot of life experience yet, they're expected in these programs to be able to access sexual emotions really quickly, and some of them have zero experience with that. So I got a lot of work just choreographing tension, sexual tension, because I actually live in a very conservative area. So just finding sexual tension between people is really useful before you even get to touching, and that's part of it too. But it really does apply all the way through, no matter how experienced you are doing this stuff on stage. The second you read a script for the first time and it says they kiss, or it says she mounts him and yada yada yada,
Wow, yeah.
Your stomach goes, oh my gosh, that's going to be really hard, and everyone starts getting nervous about it. And so what I do is I come in and I try to disarm the rehearsal, and we communicate about what it is we're trying to do, and I help them choreograph it so that it is absolutely certain that the actors know what they're doing, and the director is part of the process, and it tells the story very specifically without making them feel unsafe.
So you said that you disarm the workshop. What not the workshop. You disarm the rehearsal space. What do you find is in people's way to actually doing this work effectively?
I think there's a lot. It depends on where you are. I live in Oklahoma, and just nobody talks about sex at all. It's a very taboo topic to even, we're a little behind in Oklahoma. So getting people to just talk about sex as a topic is really difficult in itself. And so a lot of directors just kind of brush over those scenes and don't pay attention to them. And it's a disservice to the play, because when you're watching a play and you can get to the intimacy scene and it's disjointed, the audience gets taken out. And I think that that's the main thing holding everyone back, is they don't want to talk about sex, and they don't want to deal with it. And sometimes actors are like, well, I know how to have sex, so don't, that's has nothing to do with this. Whether or not you've had sex in life, yes, that helps with your experience of knowing,
What goes where, when.
personalizing it, yes. But it's not essential to do it on stage. It's just like I've never been in a fight but I can do fight choreography on stage. It's the same thing. So, you know, it's a matter of empathy and being vulnerable. And you can get to that place much easier if you have somebody on the outside guiding you through it versus two actors trying to become vulnerable by themselves with nobody watching.
That's great, because your actor for that was awesome. You're just like, and become vulnerable. Like, we kind of do that, right? It's like, all right, now I'm going to be a great actor and be like, no, I'm brave. Look at me being vulnerable.
Look how
and
vulnerable I am.
Look at how vulnerable I am. So you've developed over your years of practice, like exercises and methods to get people vulnerable. But what have you been doing in that 10 years? How much of this has been your own study and devising? How much of this has been work with mentors? Like, what's influenced you?
I was influenced heavily by stage combat. I was initially, I got my beginnings as a stage combat instructor and a choreographer, and I went to graduate school for theater pedagogy. And under David Leong and Erin Anderson, they taught us a lot about contemporary violence and how to choreograph scenes with people that don't know how to fight. So that it's not like cue, punch, and then I duck, because in a real fight, people that don't know how to fight don't fight like that. So they sort of taught us this way of using the actor's real weight sharing and real impulses to create contemporary violence scenes. And I, in those exercises, just thought, wow, this is really sexual too. Maybe I can translate it into ways to choreograph sex. And so I started kind of using their techniques and just twisting the purpose of it. And that's how it began, simultaneously with the experience of being in intimacy scenes and not really being coached or guided through it as a young 20-something-year-old.
Yeah, tell us something about your experiences, because like, not all of us have been in those situations where it's like, wow, that was ultimately like crazy uncomfortable, but you've had a couple of doozies.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's not even like they've stopped. They continue. Almost every single time I've been in one, there's been a situation. Even though I'm a choreographer, I don't always choreograph the scenes I'm in, because you need an outside eye. So, the first one that triggered me was a performance of Picasso with Le Panagile that we were in, and we just didn't have chemistry. My fellow actor and I didn't have any chemistry. We just weren't feeling anything, and we didn't know what to do, and we had to kiss and be really passionate, and it wasn't working, and the director was getting frustrated with us, understandably, and we went to practice in the lobby by ourselves, with no stage manager, with no director, with nobody with us. And then it turned into something very different instantly. It was no longer rehearsing, it was just kissing somebody. And so that was unacceptable, and I ended up, of course, we both wrecked our relationships and dated each other, and it was a nightmare. Not that he is not a cool person, he was awesome, it was just we were not meant to be together.
Yeah.
So it kind of caused havoc in my life, which then translated back into the show, and I think that was really dangerous, and that's when I decided to write my thesis and study it more. But even a year ago, I was on stage with somebody who changed the choreography on the last day of the show, and groped me more that day and kissed me extra times, which none of that is acceptable. In front of an audience, you feel like you're sort of, I don't know what's going to happen here. This person's in charge, they're doing things to me, and I'm on stage in character. So I have to respond in character, improvisationally, to a sexual scene. And that should never be the situation for any actor.
And so what do you say to people who, when they are approached with the idea of choreographing a sex scene or choreographing any kind of movement in their scene, they tell you, well, that's just not spontaneous. How can I have true impulses if I'm working with choreography?
Yeah, that's why I think training people how to choreograph intimacy is a really specialized thing. It's not just, here's the blocking, do it. It's, building it from the two actors specifically and their energy together, and using what they already have between each other to make it natural, as opposed to saying, well, I already did this show with these people, I'm just going to take that choreography and slap it on you, and now you have to be honest. That's really hard. So instead of that, the exercises that we do allow the actors to find their own impulses, and then we can use those and make sure that it's still complementing the characters. Yeah. So that's the way to avoid that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck though by the number of people who, like, in in my experience, even talking about fight choreography as well, the people who go, but this doesn't feel natural.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and of course it doesn't, because it's theater. You know, like the sex is different from onstage sex. It always will be, because when you have sex with somebody, one person, it is you and that person, and they're your only audience member. But when you are doing this for a group of 100 or 200 people, we need to make sure that they are part of what's happening right here, and that changes the choreography so that it is not natural for these two people necessarily. That's why it takes experienced actors to pull it off.
Right. So it's so much about like the actual enormous relationship, not just these two people with each other, but like how are we inviting the audience into that moment, into that relationship.
Right. And it's different if it's on film. You've got one spectator, you know, and you can play to that. But again, just sexually playing to a big group changes the choreography, and you need somebody who has experience with that to help you translate it so you don't stay within, you know, reality. It should never be reality. It's theater. It's supposed to be theater.
It's actually about communicating this moment, not
it's
about having this moment. Yeah. I mean, I know there's acting coaches out there that would rail against that and be like, no, it's about being truthful with the person in front of you.
Well, you can still be truthful.
Yeah.
You can still have chemistry between you, but you have to do the choreography the way it's just with any other acting form. Just like with fights, do you really want to kill this person? Do you need that truth on stage? No, because if you did, we would all be out of jobs. So, you know, like people would get hurt. It's the same thing with intimacy. It has to be altered for theater's purpose, but it has to be rooted in vulnerability and honesty. And you can reach that if you have a specialist helping you.
I want to go back to what you'd mentioned about your own relationship being altered by a showmance. Can you talk about that and how having an intimacy choreographer and the practice of intimacy for the stage, what that does for that thing? Because really, I mean, as we all know, showmances. It's totally possible to genuinely fall in love with the person you're working with, but so many times it's
actors, we use our emotions for our job. So falling in love with somebody happens all the time. I fall in love with everybody. But you know, choosing to leave your relationship to be with that person is something totally different. Being attracted to people, you can be attracted to anybody, and so using that chemistry and harnessing it as choreography can separate you and your partner from thinking it's real. So the moment of he just moved his hand, did he do that, or did I do that, or is he saying something? Is he changed something, or he breathed a certain way and he changed it, and does that mean that he likes me, or is that his character? And then we have this like your inner monologue is just going ga 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 ga, because you're both in control of it, and you know you're not talking, you're physically bonding.
Yeah, and it's always in front of an audience, so there's no moment to sort of stop and go like,
right, are you okay? Are we okay?
Us?
Right.
Is this, do you love me now?
Yeah.
Do you want to run away with me?
So if you have somebody, and when I'm choreographing, I'm right next to them initially. I'm like right here helping them, because I'm part of it. You know, this is not about you two. Right now, I'm part of it, and then I move back so that they can have a little bit more space, and knowing that we're all still here, it's still a theater space. It's not private. That way, there's always in the back of your mind, you're saying somebody is on the outside watching me and keeping me safe and making sure that neither of us go too far, or if we do go too far, she'll say, hey, you went too far there, did you feel that? You know, being on top of those moments and making sure that they're keeping each other safe as they go.
I think it's really neat to think of how visceral that is, to have someone there so that you're really quite physically reminded that it's not just about this and you guys are eavesdropping. It's about
it's like, hey, what are you guys doing in here?
It's actually about this relationship. Like it really is about helping the actors stay in that headspace of, I keep my screensavers on, I've got to not do that next time. Keeping an awareness of
who's around,
it being involved, and I think it sounds like that would really help keep the actors in the headspace of, this part's the craft, this part of me is still sitting in there, but I can still have an honest relationship with my character, can have an honest relationship with my scene partner's character without us getting confused by, is that person, are they flirting with me now?
Right. Which, you know, we've all flirted in rehearsal too.
Of course.
I mean, it's not to take the fun out of theater. I mean, a lot of us got into theater so we could kiss people, but
I like to wear neat clothes too. That's
and
my other
costumes,
reason.
of course.
Right, yeah.
But
and I feel like the center of attention.
yeah, because we didn't get enough when we were kids, right?
But I'm not assuming anything.
But at the same time, you know, you don't like that.
Or the word insinuating.
That sort of feeling of just nervousness that comes with, oh no, now I have to kiss him and I don't know. That sort of anxiety. It doesn't matter how old you are or how experienced you are. I feel like there's always a little bit of anxiety when it comes to scenes with intimacy.
I pretty recently had an experience where I had to kiss this guy as part of the show, and we hadn't really talked before we got there. Just like within the context of the show, we hadn't really connected as individuals outside of rehearsal. And when we got to the kissing part, I was giggling like a 12-year-old, and I was so embarrassed that I'm like, I'm a professional actor. Why am I being an idiot? Like, what is wrong with me?
Yeah.
But then I took your workshop, and we've been talking about intimacy choreography ever since. And then my most recent performance, I had an experience where I was like really making out with this guy and flirting intensely throughout the show as characters. And the work, even just the work that we did, the little bit that we've done, has been so instrumental for me, for my brain and my body understanding the difference between this is my personal relationship with this individual, and this is our characters.
Right. And they don't have to be the same.
Yeah, and how I actually feel safer to explore in rehearsal, because one of the primary things of just having a dialogue about, so how much is this like, is this with tongues or without tongues?
Right.
Or is this like, or is it just like, mwah, mwah?
Right.
Or
yeah.
I'm gonna,
yeah.
We wanna,
And
like,
all of that, is
rhythm.
a totally different scene. Every one of those kisses means something totally different. And part of the designer's job, the intimacy designer's job, is to make sure that the kiss is telling the story that the director wants to be told.
I think that's the thing that a lot of people miss when they do, because, I want to say when you said it before, even up here, where we're not in a really conservative area, there are directors who are like, okay, now you guys just go take care of that, because there's a lot of people who, like you said, just don't want to deal with it. And I think one of the best outcomes of having an intimacy choreographer or understanding intimacy for the stage as a practice is that we can actually really fully craft those moments, and the audience doesn't suddenly do that thing where they go, oh, something different's happening now, and they accept that. Yeah. And just like with fights, where everyone talks about at some point the idea that we've got some acting happening, and then there's the fight scene, and then there's some acting happening, and it's like this thing that gets dropped into the show, which is like insane. And the same thing happens with intimacy.
Yeah, if you have a good choreographer for either, good movement coach, they know how to blend it into the director's vision so that it doesn't look so startling.
Yeah, and the actors feel like it's part of one thing, and not when new directors come in, so we'll just like it's like a movie where you're like, oh, clearly someone else wrote that scene. Right. It's like, oh, that's weird.
And not to like sort of downplay the difficulty of handling these scenes. These are not easy scenes to handle. This is not something that just anyone can do, because there's a lot of empathy involved in choreographing these scenes. You have to be watching the actors very closely, and you have to know when you're pushing them too far and when you're not pushing them enough, and you have to really be listening, and not everyone has that skill set, and it's not just, something that you can necessarily train in a minute, but it takes a lot of time to understand where people are being pushed, and asking them to share a lot with you, and making a safe space for them to explore.
And I think sometimes it's also noticing like what kind of difficulty the actor's having. Like sometimes it's they're being hard on themselves, sometimes they're not sure about where their relationship is with their partner, and it's not just being sensitive to what the actor's going through, but also having the skill to help them through it by being able to identify what exactly is their difficulty, and how do you support? How do you actually support the actor through what they're going through? Because the end goal is, how do we support this story? How do we help these actors in whatever way get out of their own way, get out of their partner's way? Like what?
Yeah.
So
and 9 times out of 10, it's their own self-confidence getting in the way. 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
But because everybody has that, of course. On
course.
Stage, and we can't say that these directors have been doing it wrong, because there hasn't been intimacy for the stage is not a thing yet. I mean, I've been doing it for 10 years, but it's not a understood industry yet. And it's a really important one to get people to start using, that this is even a thing that exists, because it took a long time for fight choreographers to catch on, that people needed to hire people to come in to keep it safe. And the goal is to make, and we're still working on it.
No.
And the goal is to make, intimacy specialists, so just knowledgeable that this exists,
And
that
yeah,
this is
part
somebody
of-
you can call.
Part of the creative team, just like I was talking with a sound designer friend, and he said it pretty much the same thing, that sound design was at one point just this completely foreign idea. Like, why would you hire somebody to deal with little sounds? But it really is part of the whole experience.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the hopes and aspirations and dreams and future plans of intimacy for the stage. And so in a nutshell, the idea is we want this to become
a topic that's not estranged from the community, that it's something that we can start talking about and communicating. There's been a lot of sexual harassment cases in theaters lately that have kind of sprung up with,
or coming to light.
Yes, or coming to light. More to say,
accurate.
now that feminism has changed a lot, and with what's happening politically, there's been a lot of talk.
It's election day. If you're watching this, not on the day.
I hope that we're all not dead tomorrow.
Boy.
But that's a huge deal when people that everyone looks up to are making sexist remarks. That sets us all back.
And it's even considered, like, in some circles, it's actually considered quite appropriate behavior to
absolutely
disparage people based on whatever bigotry it is, whether it be race, religion, gender, sexual preference. Like, all of these things are not acceptable ways to evaluate a person.
Right. And that crops up a lot of people stepping forward and saying, I was mistreated and I don't want to do this anymore. I'm being hurt, and people are finally getting empowered and had enough. And they're stepping forward and saying, this is not okay. I don't want to be treated like this. I feel unsafe, and I don't want to, I'm either going to leave the industry or just not work with that person ever again. And so that can all be avoided, and lawsuits can be avoided if we have a procedure and we have, sort of a universal contract that we all agree on about how to do this and how to treat it professionally and safely, while still not sacrificing the integrity of the show.
In some of the research that I was doing, stage manager friend Sandy Becker helped me out by looking through the CTA for me, and some of the stuff, what's remarkable is that yes, there's stuff in there about sexual harassment, but there's very little in there about and there's a little bit in there about nudity in relation to auditions and if nudity is expected in the show, but there's very little about touch and consent and sort of the middle ground between not touching each other at all and any practices that go through. There are some things that are currently considered common sense, and I feel like one of the goals of our work is to help what we consider best practices for intimacy choreography to become common sense.
Right.
So all these things that are currently mysteries, and it's not like we're trying to keep it secret. We're actually really trying to get the word out to people in a way that is informative and that is clear. It was something I've heard a lot from actors over the last while during my development as an intimacy choreographer, is how even though they haven't necessarily felt assaulted or harassed, there is a certain lack of safety. So even just participating in a workshop and being reminded that they can have a conversation, they can ask for consent, they can give consent and remove it at any point, they can have a discussion about it, really helps them feel empowered and gives them a sense of agency and helps them feel so much safer in their work.
Right. I think that the industry exploding with an overpopulation of actors and an overpopulation of artists, which is great, but at the same time you have a lot of these little theater companies popping up with people less experienced that are putting on very unprofessional quality process. And
that's even things like just not taking enough breaks.
Right.
You know, it's not even other things. It's like feed your people, or let your people find food,
water,
pay them, make sure they have enough time to get water. Yeah, all that stuff. So those little things that you don't necessarily know you have a right to when you go from just desperate to make work to no, I'm going to make work and I'm going to get paid for it. And I'm going to live a decent standard of living while I do it.
I think a lot of actors just they sort of sacrifice a lot to do what they do because they love to do it, and also they aren't willing to step forward and say, I'm being mistreated here because they're afraid they're going to lose a job.
Yeah, we don't want to be labeled as troublesome.
Right.
Or not brave. Like it's people who are playing the aggressors and people who are playing the victims. Like we forget sometimes that being an aggressor in this situation, or being, if you're so generally it's men who are expected to be okay with it. But a lot of great men out there are like, I don't want to touch you without consent, but we haven't talked about how I do this. So how do I?
Right.
Do I just man up and take you, or like what's the right way to do this? So there's so much confusion from all sides of how to.
Right. And when your partner says, "Go ahead and just grab me and touch me anywhere. It's fine."
With that tone?
Yeah, it's like that doesn't help.
With that?
That's not. Don't do that.
I don't believe.
I don't actually believe that's true. And now I'm awkward and you're awkward, and we're not really being vulnerable. We're both being guarded. So that's why an outside eye is really helpful. And I think that actors understanding that they have a basic human right to feel safe in the workplace is really what it comes down to. Is that you have the right, even if you are just an actor, which is a very noble profession. To go to a stage manager and say, the choreography changed. I don't know if you saw, but this happened and it was not blocked. And even though the show's already running, the stage manager's job is to make sure that the choreography stays the same. I mean, you can explore to a certain amount, but the choreography shouldn't change because a choreographer made it. It's their design. You wouldn't add an extra slap in a fight. You wouldn't add an extra dance move in a dance. Somebody choreographed that. So why would you add another kiss? Why would you add another grope?
And I think it's important at this moment, too, to recognize that each of those design choices, if you think about choreography as part of the design team, like sound is part of the design team, the dance is part of the design team, those moves were chosen for specific storytelling reasons.
Right, with the director in mind and the vision of the show in mind. And when the actors take it upon themselves to change it because they just think that's what needs to happen, they're ignoring all the people that worked on it from the outside to make it look like a cohesive production. And whether or not their choice to change it is a better choice, because it has nothing to do with
Let's admit, sometimes that also happens.
It can happen, but that's not your job. The actor's job is not to choreograph. The actor's job is to do what the choreographer told them to do,
and
the director told
live
them to
that,
do.
like, imbue life and bring all of themselves to the text. Like, I really like to think about movement and choreography as part of your text. Like,
yes, it is.
Every
it's part of the
time
script. The script says you kiss her like this. It doesn't say you kiss her like this and then sometimes you add like another slap on the butt. That's not in the script. And the script was what we all talked about in rehearsal. So, stick with what the designers put together, because you cannot tell from the inside of the production what it looks like out there. You never can.
So what would you suggest to an actor how does an actor feel part of that design process? Like, is that something that is really going to change choreographer to choreographer? Like, that process will be quite different? Like, how does an actor, I guess what I'm trying to ask is,
are the actors part of the design process, you mean?
Well, and actors don't want to feel like pawns and they have no input. So where is that balance? And
when I'm choreographing intimacy, I am constantly asking them questions. The actors have more input than anyone else in the choreography process. The director is there making sure that they're still adhering to the overall
making sure that vision and the story is being told.
But no one can answer the questions about the characters as well as the actors. And so a lot of it comes from, what is he thinking right here? She just touched him. What is he thinking? Is he thinking yes, or is he thinking, what is it? And then they will answer, and then we will choreograph based on that answer. And then we go through every part of it, every finger of it, so to say, and make sure that it all goes with their intention. And our job as movement people is to make sure that their bodies are telling the story that they are trying to tell with their soul, essentially.
Yeah, like the impulse is being actually expressed in a way that the audience can receive it.
Right, and that can be a difference between your hand being here and your hand being here. Those are two different things.
I was looking at a photograph. I just did Taming of the Shrew, and we were doing some production photos, and then the movement designer, one of the movement designers, came over and they said, make sure you turn your palms out, because when I was standing there being held like this, it's amazing how that reads as a submission as opposed to this.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and it doesn't feel all that well. It does now, of course, now I'm aware of it.
Yeah,
it feels like, it's completely different. But in the moment, because we're still in the midst of rehearsal, in the moment, I'm still so much so much sensory information coming in that I really needed someone from the outside to say, make sure you do this, because it's just not telling the story that is important for us to tell right now.
And just because you are a movement person does not mean that you don't need a coach on the outside. You know, it's a totally different thing.
It's a different
Having
process.
somebody on the outside watching every part of your body to make sure it's telling the story, you can't be totally involved and vulnerable at the same time as being your own outside eye. It's just, you can't do it, and it's
which is why actors who direct themselves into Oscars is like,
I don't even know.
It's amazing.
It's crazy amount of work. You know, but to be honest, they have a camera, so they can tape themselves and watch it.
Oh, there you go.
We don't have that ability. We can tape ourselves and watch it, but it will never look the same as it does in person.
And a theater process, how many times do you actually have time to
videotape
do everything twice
and then watch it? Yeah,
videotape and watch, videotape and watch. I mean, it's
barely.
It can be effective, but like you said, and it is different in person. And I'm always struck by. I shouldn't be. It shouldn't be a surprise. But how different something is once you see it in context. Like once you have the actual build up, and suddenly you're like, this moment is now, like, different in key important ways.
Yeah.
That we couldn't be aware of without seeing it in context.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes the actors need permission to explore. You know, they don't feel like they have permission to do what they want to do because they can't communicate and nobody's telling them it's okay. So giving them permission is also a big part of it. Permission to explore, permission to touch, permission to kiss. But I'm here. I'm right here with you. I'm not going to leave you, and I wouldn't make you do anything that I wouldn't do. And, you know, and sometimes it also takes standing in for one of them to show them what I mean. You know, like, let me physically show you so you can see it on me, what you're doing and what I need you to do. And you tell me if you can see the difference in it, and they usually can. You know?
That's my phone. I'm just going to turn that off. Yeah, so while I do, I should just do that. Stop talking. I'm back. So I wanted to ask you about, so who can be an intimacy choreographer? Or, I mean, not who, like yes or no, but what skill set, someone coming into intimacy choreography, what's some great background to have?
An acting teacher background is great because the longer you've taught people, the more empathetic you are to what their needs are and how every person is individually different, and you need to change your energy based on their energy. Having training in movement in general is, I think, essential because you have to know the body, and you have to know what little things mean in the body and what makes people vulnerable.
Before, like what's like really subtle postural changes. Well, it's like we were talking, like this really not so subtle action,
right? And
how just an awareness of how the body works, is really,
on a very micro level. Yeah. I think pedagogy, if there's pedagogy, is really great because just the study of teaching, knowing how to command a room, how to make the space safe so these people can explore it, how to make it professional and yet fun at the same time. You can lighten up, because if it's too serious, then everyone will feel a little bit
up.
Yeah, you have to keep it light while still getting it, you know, being professional about it. You can't make inappropriate jokes, you know, which happens a lot, I find, in rehearsals, where there's a lot of weird comments about, you know, things that should not be said in a workplace. Yeah,
and especially, like, I wonder, sometimes it's people being ignorant, but sometimes it's, like, people trying to be funny and disarm, and, I mean, until you've had a chance, maybe those people just aren't really great at reading rooms, and sure, it's working for these three people, but for that one person over there who is involved in, or, you know, or in some way, because they're in the room, if you've got that vibe of someone being really uncomfortable, then your rehearsal room's not working.
An energy vampire can also bring the whole thing down. But I think that stems from, you know, some artists are introverts and some are extroverts. And you have to know how to get them to work together as a coach. So I think empathy is a huge skill that is needed, essential to be choreographing this stuff. But that's essential in choreographing anything, really. I think. But
especially when you're, like, working with other people's bodies and you're expressing their impulses through movement that you give them.
So they have to trust you. and you have to set up that trust within the first 2 minutes that you start talking.
So here's something that we haven't actually talked about much. You and I have been working together, and you and I have been working with a lot of women.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any experience of intimacy choreographers who are men? And is that because it's really easy to go, well, women will be great at this, but I mean, I certainly don't agree with that. But what do you find are the hurdles for men coming into this work?
Well, it's funny because when I got started in 2004, we had a very different climate with feminism and with sexism and all that.
Yeah.
And when I came forward, I was in my mid-20s. I was really, really young. I was really ambitious. So
as you ought to be.
So
as
it was,
because of what it's done to you.
I was busy. But, you know, it was really hard to command a room at that age. And the older I get, the easier it gets with experience as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the climate was
Resume
different.
behind you now,
Part of
too.
the reason I went into this was because I was surrounded by men in a field of stage combat.
Yeah.
And I was going, okay, well, I don't really fit into this world because I'm a young woman and I don't think I'm going to get very far. But this intimacy is something that people would maybe prefer a woman to be doing. And that was the mentality in 2004. And I used to say that, like, a woman can step in and touch either one of them and they won't instantly be freaked out. Because I was dealing with students. An older professor, like a 45-year-old male professor touching a 18-year-old freshman.
There are questions. Maybe.
There are some, you know,
there's
some
much
issues
more
with that maybe
negotiation to be done.
in academia. Maybe not so much in the professional world, but definitely in academia.
But even still, I mean, you've got a young actress who is eager to, generally speaking, not that this is how you have to behave, but generally speaking, any young actor is eager to please and eager to go, yes, I am a professional. I've totally been doing this a while, and I know exactly how to behave properly. So there can be a lot of ignoring of one's own impulses if someone's not in the right environment right away.
Right. So, but then I've evolved into, you know, I've done a lot of work with Matthew Ellis, with my husband, doing contemporary violence with him, and we do sexual violence together. And watching him with students, you know, meeting other men that have taught this. I know two or three other males that started choreographing this along with fights, and they're having a great amount of success because professionalism isn't about gender, and sex is not about gender, and so I think that if you are a threatening persona, it doesn't matter if you're a male or a female, people will be scared of you and they won't want to work. It's about your energy more than it is about your gender.
Right, because we have talked about a few women out there who, as perhaps aren't people that we would like to be.
Just because you're a woman does not mean you should be choreographing intimacy.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to
it's not a prerequisite.
We've had a ton, so much, and it's a very, very prevalent discussion. Is the work that you do is not based on anything, but your skill, your capability, who you are, and has nothing to do with how tall you are, how short you are, how brown your hair is. You know, as much as it is certainly not about your gender, your sexual preferences, your religion, your race, any of those beliefs, any of those actions.
And sexual preference is a big part of that too. When I started off, I was mostly doing straight sex scenes, and since then, you know, I've done a lot of same sex scenes, and that made me nervous at first too because back then it wasn't as prevalent on stage as it is now. Okay. So, which is so awesome, and I'm always thrilled to do same sex intimacy. I find it really fun. Especially when that's not the actor's preferences. I think it's really great for them to try to do because we all have been there and where, you know, there's like a role and it's like, okay, well, this is outside of my comfort zone and I'm going to have to really challenge myself here. And some people have, you know, some hang-ups about some things.
Yeah.
Can you find chemistry with anybody? And I think the answer is yes.
That's great. I think that's where we'll actually end it off. So there is a workshop this weekend at Theatre Ontario. If you are in Toronto or within driving distance,
come and play. It's really fun.
Yeah, learn about this stuff. And from my own experience, I have to say that I have totally grown as an actor. Just being reminded of how does one find chemistry? How does one really enter a scene this way? So yes, it's about choreographing kissing and sex scenes, but it really is, as Tonia said at the beginning, so much about one's work as an actor and reaching a place of vulnerability so we can really tell a truthful story. So theatreontario.org, check out the website and sign up for Intimacy for the Stage Weekend Intensive.
Thank you.
Thanks.